Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. To mark the occasion, here's my review of Stardew Valley for PC, Mac, Linux, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, PS Vita, and mobile devices. Though, of course, what you're seeing here is the PC version. Now, those of you who've watched my videos for a while probably know that this is not remotely the kind of game I would normally play, and you might be thinking I've gone completely insane. And to that I say, you simply haven't been watching my videos long enough, because I've been insane this entire time. Why else would I do what I do? At any rate, this is a life and farming simulation mixed with RPG elements game developed by Concerned Ape and originally released in 2016 for PC, and it was later ported to the other systems. It's generally been very well received across the board, and apparently as of January of this year, it has sold over 10 million copies across all platforms, which is incredibly impressive for an indie game developed by one person. And that would be impressive enough if Concerned Ape, aka Eric Barone, only did say the programming, but he did the entire game, from the programming to the artwork and the sound, especially the music, and given the sheer scope of what's in the game, that is extremely impressive. And it's also incredibly impressive that the game managed to sell as well as it did, being in as niche of a genre as it is. I mean, think about it this way, how many other games of this type can you think of? Probably just Animal Crossing and Harvest Moon, although there are certainly other games in the genre, especially now that Stardew Valley was successful and other people are doing similar projects. And while Stardew Valley certainly bears a lot of influence from the Harvest Moon series in particular, but also a few of the other ones out there, they're not really going to factor into this particular review, simply because I haven't played them. They were either only available on systems I didn't have when they came out, or by the time I did have those systems, they were prohibitively expensive, and I wasn't really all that interested in the genre, so I just never got around to looking at any of them. So how was my first foray into this particular type of farming and life simulation game? Well, let's just go ahead and start delving right into it and find out. And like always, we'll go ahead and start with the presentation, which is 2D pixel art from a top-down perspective, and it's generally very well done pixel art that has a pretty good amount of detail to it. It is bright and colorful and visually pleasing. But while Stardew Valley certainly looks good for an indie pixel art game, especially one made by one person, unfortunately, indie games that use pixel art are extremely common, which means that there is a fair amount of fatigue associated with that particular art style. So as good as Stardew Valley looks, it looks like a lot of other indie games out there, although it is one of the better looking examples of them, and thus it ultimately has to look for other ways to distinguish itself. This leads us over to the sound design, where the sound effects are generally pretty solid, although they're nothing impressive. They just get the job done, and that's it. And there's no voice acting in the game at all. But then there's the music, which is generally quite excellent across the board, and the only real problem with it is that it plays the same handful of tracks when you're wandering around the different areas, and if you play the game for a long period of time, that can get a bit repetitive. Although given how good the music is and how relaxing it can be, as well as just how upbeat and lighthearted most of it is, it's never really much of a problem. So when you bring all of the presentation together, the visuals themselves are definitely aesthetically pleasing, and they certainly are very well done. It's just that there's a lot of pixel art indie games out there, and it really is ultimately the music that makes the presentation stand out. But of course what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is actually very simplistic. There's not much to it, and it's really just set up for what you're ultimately going to be doing throughout the rest of the game. The idea is that after you create your character, you go through a cutscene where your dying grandfather gives you a sealed envelope and tells you to only open it when your life feels like it is going nowhere and that you really need something different. And so later on in life, when you're working at a dead-end corporate job at Joja Corporation, you ultimately do end up opening that letter and find that it is the deed to a farm that is in the very rural area known as Stardew Valley. And so you leave your corporate job and the city behind and go to Stardew Valley, where the mayor shows you the farm, and you find out very quickly that it is completely dilapidated and needs a lot of work. And thus you'll be starting up your task of clearing all of the debris out of the farm, followed by getting crops planted, and eventually building up the farm to have animals as well, like cows or chickens or whatever, expanding your house so it gets bigger and has a kitchen, among other things, and of course clearing out more land so you can plant more crops and ultimately get more revenue. Along the way, you'll also be building up relationships with all the various townsfolk, and in fact there are certain townsfolk where you can build up your relationship to the point where you can start dating them, and eventually you can marry them. And if you end up getting married and you've expanded the house enough, you can even start raising a family with them. In addition to all of this, there's also a subplot about community development, and this can be accomplished in two different ways. Either the way that's generally considered the intended way, and which the vast majority of people do, which is restoring the community center and thus really fostering that sense of small town development, or you can get a membership at the Joja Corporation store and you'll have to do all the community development through that. Although again, that's what the vast majority of people don't do, and it makes sense not to do so because the Joja Corporation is exactly what you were trying to avoid in the first place. But regardless of which one you decide to go with, you're ultimately going to be gradually gaining access to new areas and new functions as you continue to develop the community, and eventually you will hit the point where the community is fully developed. And while the game doesn't really end per se, it does have a point where your grandfather's spirit will assess everything that you've done up to that point and give you a rating based on that. And that point is after 2 in-game years, at which point your grandfather's spirit will assess all of your abilities, which gradually level up over time, but I'll get to that more in a moment, all of the community development you've done, your relationships with all the townsfolk, whether you've been married or not, all of that sort of thing. But regardless of whatever your grandfather's rating is, you'll be able to keep playing, and you'll be able to continue improving things, and there's even a way to redo the assessment and see if you can get a better score on it. This means that the win condition for Stardew Valley is basically just whenever you feel like you're done with the game. Which in turn means that nearly everything in this game comes down to its gameplay, because there's not a whole lot of writing here. Sure, there is dialogue with all of the townsfolk, but it's very simplistic, and they generally will repeat the same things over and over and over again, with unique events only happening once you've hit certain thresholds in their relationship with them, and that is represented by a number of hearts that'll be able to build up over time as you continue to talk to them, as well as give them gifts. And some of these special events do require you to be in certain places at certain times, or during certain conditions, like say rain or snow or something like that. As you continue to go through these events, and of course gradually build up your relationship with all the different townsfolk, you will find that several of them are quite quirky and strange, like Abigail, for example, who says, "How'd you know I was hungry?" when you give her quartz as a gift. Which is pretty hilarious, because in case you didn't know, quartz is actually harder than steel. But aside from the quirky and strange ones, there's also the fairly normal ones who just happen to be very friendly and pleasant, or people who are not quite so friendly, like Old George, who is generally a very grumpy old man, a persona which you gradually chip away at as you become friends with them. And then there's people who tend to fall a bit more into stereotype, like Willie the Fisherman, and people who are just miserable to be around, like Shane, who makes me look like a pleasant person. As you continue developing your friendships with these various folks and you gradually get your heart count up, eventually you might hit an 8 heart count with certain individuals, and these are the eligible bachelors and bachelorettes. And at that point, you will unlock the ability to buy a bouquet from Pierre's store in town, and you will be able to gift that to them to become their girlfriend or boyfriend, at which point you will be able to continue developing your relationship with them to get them up to maximum hearts for most people, which is 10 hearts. And if you've hit that point and you have upgraded your house at least once and it's a rainy day, you can go to the beach and you can buy a mermaid's pendant from the old mariner, and then you can use that to propose marriage. And once you've married someone, they'll move on to your farm and start occasionally helping out with things around the farm, and you'll be able to give them gifts basically whenever you want, although you'll still only be able to give them 1 per day, because the limitations for everyone else are 1 per day and 2 per week, but it just removes the 2 per week limitation on spouses. And you'll also be able to improve your relationship with that person by an additional 4 hearts. And if for whatever reason that's not working out for you, you can certainly file for divorce, but it is very expensive to do so, so you need to make sure you really want to. Now, with all of that said, interacting with the townspeople can be a bit frustrating at times because there is a decaying mechanic on your relationship with them. If you don't at least talk to them every single day, your relationship with them will gradually decay and you will gradually lose hearts with them. Obviously, if you talk with them at least once a day, that's not really that much of a problem, but that can really eat into your time, which you do have a pretty limited amount of per day. This means that you might opt more for the gift-giving aspect of it, where, again, you can only gift 2 things per week and 1 thing per day, so you do need to be very mindful of what you're gifting an individual, and in fact, every single character has different things that they like or outright love, and different things that they really dislike or outright hate. And depending on what you give a person, it will affect your friendship with them either positively or negatively, and to higher or lower degrees. Obviously, if you give them something they love, then it will affect them much more and much more positively than if you give them something they simply are neutral towards. And of course, if you give them something they hate, it will affect their friendship with you much more negatively than if you give them something they simply dislike. These effects are also amplified on that character's birthday, so if you give them something that they love on their birthday, it will very positively affect your friendship with them, and likewise, the opposite is true if you give them something they hate. Thing is, unless you do something like consulting a guide or a wiki, there's not really much way of knowing what a person's going to like or dislike except by trial and error, or if you get particularly lucky with an NPC conversation where somebody's close to that particular person and will tell you something that they really like or dislike. And with the sheer amount of items that you can gift to someone in the game, that can be a bit of a frustrating process. So that feeds into the idea that you basically need the wiki open while you're playing this, just to double check and reference some things as you're playing. The thing is, it's not like in, say, Dark Souls, where when you play that game you have to have the wiki open because the game doesn't explain anything. It's more that Stardew Valley has so many things going on that you may not necessarily be able to keep track of all of it without having a quick reference guide available. That is, of course, both a blessing and a curse. It's good that it has a very large amount of stuff in it, but at the same time, it can be a bit annoying if you're having to go to a wiki and just scroll through things in order to double check something that you might have missed. Thing is, where that is almost exclusively a curse in a game like, say, Dark Souls or Bloodborne or something like that, it is just more of an annoyance with Stardew Valley because there's not really a failure state in Stardew Valley. For example, even if your health bottoms out while you're in the mines and you end up collapsing, you actually will wake up shortly thereafter, although you will have lost some things in the process, which is of course rather irritating, but there is a way of getting at least some of your stuff back by going to the Adventurers Guild and using their item recovery service. But chances are you're not even going to need that, because the combat in this game is extremely simplistic and easy, where you only have 3 weapon types and they all behave pretty much in the same way. Those are daggers, swords, and clubs or hammers, bundled into the same group, where the clubs or hammers are slower and you have a secondary attack where you smash downwards with them. The swords are just a basic attack, and daggers are a quick attack. And there's no real nuance to that system. It's just walk up to an enemy and start whacking it until it dies, and then it'll drop either a monster loot item or occasionally some other things as well, and you can go about your merry way. The monsters generally don't pose much of a threat to you at all, and really the only time you're ever going to have to worry about them is when you get pretty far into the mines or into certain areas that have more powerful enemies in them, and at that point, the only thing you need to worry about is the fact that the enemies do a lot of damage, which is extremely easy to offset just by carrying food with you, which you're probably going to be doing anyway because you need to be able to replenish your energy as you continue to whack rocks and such to mine materials. So since combat is mostly a trivial process, it more or less ends up being an afterthought, and you're going to focus more on the other elements of Stardew Valley's gameplay, where you have a lot of different systems that each have their own quirks. The farming system is actually rather straightforward. You go onto your farm and you start tilling land by using the hoe, and that will allow you to plant things in that space. Before you plant something in that space, however, you may want to use a fertilizer to potentially improve the quality of the crop when it comes time to harvest it. And between when you plant your crop and when you harvest it, you're going to need to be watering that crop every single day using the watering can, except on days where it rains, where all of your crops are automatically watered by the rain. Some crops are a one-and-done affair, where you plant it, you water it, it eventually grows and you harvest it, and then that space is left empty for you to plant something else. Other crops grow on a trellis, and those will stay behind, and you actually can't move through a trellis like you can with other crop types. There are also other crops that continue to produce after the first harvest, and you can just continue to water those plants as well as water the ones that are on the trellises, and they will continue to produce over time, and you'll be able to continually harvest from them without having to plant new ones. At the end of a season, each of which lasts 28 days, all of the crops you've planted that aren't specifically noted as carrying over between seasons will die, and you'll need to clear those out using the scythe or the hoe in order to plant anything new in that space. This means that you'll have to go down to the shop in town and buy new seeds in order to be able to plant new crops, and you'll have to do this at the beginning of every single season, except for, of course, winter, where no crops will grow. And while this process is fairly lengthy and tedious at the beginning of the game, once you've leveled up your farming abilities a few times, you'll eventually be able to get sprinklers, which will automatically water your crops, and you basically won't need to worry about them anymore. You'll just be able to plant your crops, let the sprinklers automatically water them for you, and when it comes time to harvest, you can just go in there, harvest them all, and then move on with your day. That will of course allow you to focus more on certain other gameplay elements, like of course the adventuring stuff that I've already mentioned, but also things like mining and crafting, as well as fishing. Mining is a pretty straightforward process, where you go into the mines or the quarry once you've unlocked that, and you use your pickaxe to whack rocks until they break apart into just stones or minerals or whatever the case may be. And of course you will eventually unlock the ability to use explosives to take out a whole wide area of them, as opposed to just going one at a time with the pickaxe. As you continue to mine things, you'll gain access to new ores, which you can craft into bars, and you can use those bars at the blacksmith in order to upgrade your various tools, or you can use them in crafting recipes around the farm as well. Minerals can also sometimes be used in crafting recipes, but more often than not, they're just something that you'll be able to get a bit of extra money for, or you'll be able to give them away as gifts, or you can give one example of each to the museum, for which you will receive certain rewards once you hit certain milestones. Of course, minerals aren't the only thing you can donate to the museum. There's also a wide variety of artifacts that you can find by just tilling the soil or finding different locations that are marked by 3 moving roots that can be tilled to find some more special items, and sometimes enemies will drop some of these items as well. As you go about the process of mining, you will notice eventually that your pickaxe cannot break apart certain rocks. For example, you can't break apart a meteorite unless you have at least a gold pickaxe. So if you're planning on doing a lot of mining, it will behoove you to certainly get as many ores as you can, make them into bars, and of course upgrade your pickaxe. Now, whenever you upgrade one of your tools, you need to leave it at the blacksmith for a number of days before it will be ready, so you need to be careful not to drop something off at the blacksmith when you might actually need it within the next day or two, and instead you should do that only when you're certain that you're not going to be needing that particular tool for at least a few days. Now, the axe, pickaxe, and trash can are safe to upgrade pretty much whenever, as long as you're not planning on doing any woodcutting or mining in the near future, but upgrading the watering can in particular is probably something you're going to wait until winter to do, because during winter your crops won't grow. As you continue to upgrade both the hoe and the watering can, you will increase the area effect by being able to hold the button down instead of just using it only on one square, and it will be able to expand across multiple squares, and as you continue to upgrade the watering can or hoe, the radius will increase. The axe and the pickaxe, on the other hand, do block off certain things from being chopped or mined respectively, so if you want to chop up some of the stumps that are on your farm, you'll need to upgrade to at least a copper axe, and if you want to take care of the logs, you'll need to upgrade to at least a steel axe. Same sort of thing happens with the pickaxe, except that it only does that for boulders, which are the much larger rocks that will break apart into much more resources, as well as, of course, meteorites. There are, however, some tools that you cannot upgrade, like the bucket, or shears, or the scythe, where there is a better scythe in the game, but you can't upgrade to it. You have to find that scythe, as well as the fishing rods. Once you hit certain levels in the fishing skill, you will unlock the ability to purchase the next tier of fishing rod, and that will expand its capabilities and make fishing a bit easier for you. which is a good thing, because the fishing minigame is awful, and it makes the fishing absolutely miserable until you've leveled it up quite a bit. It involves keeping a green bar behind where the fish icon is on a meter that goes up and down, and moving the bar requires you to either press and hold the button, or press the button repeatedly in order to continually move the bar around, and you can only move the bar up, otherwise you have to let go of the button and let it fall down, which means that it's just this obnoxious balancing act that especially gets irritating when you have certain fish that like to zip all over the place. Because they'll zip around faster than you can even react to it using this system, let alone keep the bar behind them. So you have to level up the fishing skill to the point where you can actually use some tools that will help you with that. This means that the fishing mechanic starts out as an obnoxious, infuriating mess, and as you continue to grind through it and level up your fishing skill, it does become a bit easier and more manageable, but it never stops being obnoxious. I mean, you can also fish by putting out crab pots and putting bait in those, but you don't unlock the ability to craft those until you've leveled up fishing quite a bit. So if you want to level up your fishing to make it more manageable, which is something you're going to need to do if you have any hope of completing all of the different bundles that are available, well, you're just going to be stuck grinding out levels in fishing by just repeatedly suffering through the fishing minigame. Oh, and before you start saying something about it in the comments, because I know there's going to be some of you out there who say, oh no, DW, the fishing minigame's easy, you just suck at it, you need to get good. First off, nobody cares about your skills at the fishing minigame in Stardew Valley, so just get off your high horse. And more importantly, not only is the fishing minigame the only minigame associated with any of the things you're doing in this game, but it's a poorly designed minigame where the only solution to it is just to grind out levels so that the game makes it easier to perform the minigame. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off track here. The point is that the fishing mechanics are unfortunately pretty irritating due to the poorly designed minigame that just ends up being frustrating rather than entertaining or challenging. This ultimately leaves us with only a few mechanics left to discuss, the first of them being the animal systems, where you can have coops as well as barns, and you can have various animals in them, like chickens and ducks and such in coops, and cows and goats and such in barns. Once you've gone to the town carpenter with the requisite amount of money and resources, you can task her with building one of these structures on your farm, as well as additional structures like silos or a fish pond or things like that, and you'll be able to choose where it goes on your farm, and once it's constructed, then you can start getting animals into that particular building. Again, small animals for coops and larger animals for barns. Once you've got your animals, you need to make sure that they are fed either by being able to eat grass that is in front of the building or by eating hay that is stored in silos and can be placed into the barn or coop. And as long as the animals are fed and are happy enough, as well as are on good enough terms with you, they will start to produce goods like eggs or milk or wool or things along those lines. These goods, like everything else that's produced on your farm, can be either sold directly or you can craft them into additional things which might sell for more. For example, milk can be crafted into cheese, eggs can be crafted into mayonnaise, and wool can be crafted into cloth. The higher your friendship level with the various animals, the better quality products they will produce. So if they have rather low friendship with you, then they might just produce standard ones, whereas when they have much higher friendship values with you, they will start producing more and more valuable items that are much higher quality. And while you might be a bit concerned at first with having to feed the animals on a regular basis and getting caught up in other things and forgetting to do it, but the only major consequence with not feeding the animals is simply that they don't produce anything until they are fed. So you need to be a bit careful to make sure that you at least leave food out for them, but it's not the end of the world if you happen to forget a day or two, because while they certainly won't die from it, they will definitely get mad at you for not feeding them. And of course, if they're not fed, then they don't produce any goods. So your morning routine, once you have animals on the farm, will be something like this. You'll wake up, you'll watch TV in order to check what the weather is going to be the following day, what your fortunes are, which determines your luck for the day, and maybe the Queen of Sauce, which will give you a recipe, or it will be a rerun that has a previous recipe, or it'll be Living Off the Land, which gives you some tips on foraging or certain aspects of building things on the farm or something along those lines. And then once you've done that, you're going to go and take care of all of your crops and your animals, if you have any, of course. And by the time you're finished with all of that, at least until you have some of the automation up and running, you'll probably be around 8 or 9 in the morning, and at that point, all of the shops and buildings and such open up, and you're able to go into town and interact with all of the townsfolk. You're able to go to the shops and buy or sell things, and if the feature has been unlocked by this point, you will be able to travel to other regions and mess around with stuff there. Regardless of what you end up doing, you will ultimately be leveling up various skills as you continue to do this. You have the farming skill, which is leveled up by harvesting crops and caring for your animals. You have mining, which is of course leveled up by breaking rocks. You have foraging, which is leveled up by chopping down trees with an axe, as well as gathering various items that just spawn around the world as foraged goods. You have fishing, which is of course leveled up by completing the fishing minigame, but also by using crab pots, as well as the combat skill, which is leveled up exclusively by killing monsters. As you level up these skills, you will gradually gain access to new crafting recipes, as well as improve your efficiency with the tools associated with that particular job. And you will also gradually unlock professions within those skills that will give you a choice between 2 larger bonuses. As an example, when you hit level 5 in farming, you'll be able to choose between rancher or tiller, which gives you a bonus to either animal products being worth more or crops being worth more, respectively. And that trend is going to be the case across all of the different skills. Once you hit level 5, you'll gain access to 2 of them, and then when you hit level 10, you'll gain access to more. When you choose a profession, it is semi-permanent in the sense that you can eventually change professions by going to a specific location and paying a large sum of gold, but until you gain access to that, you're not going to be able to change the profession once you've chosen it. Now, of course, in theory, this is a perfectly fine idea, but in practice, it's a bit messy in places, particularly with the farming skill. You see, until you've leveled up the farming skill at least once, and I might remind you that it requires you to harvest crops in order to level that up, you're not going to be able to make any scarecrows, which means that crows can just show up and devour your crops, which is incredibly irritating when you're starting the game out and don't have much money to buy seeds with. And I mean, sure, it does only require you to level up once, which you will do once you've harvested your first crop of parsnips, but it's strange that such basic farming equipment would be considered something that needs to be gated behind a leveling wall at all. I mean, the game generally gives you the basic equipment for pretty much everything else, although there are a few things here and there you do need to buy, but they're usually not that expensive. And while you'll level up your farming skill to the point where you can construct scarecrows very quickly, it does still take several in-game days to be able to do that, and it's just strange that that would be required in the first place when the basic equipment is available for pretty much everything else right from the start. But that's really the only truly strange thing with regards to the leveling system and what it makes available to you. All of the other ones are fairly intuitive, and it's not really going to be anything to where you're going to be bothered by unlocking it later on in the progression, because by the time you do unlock it, you'll probably actually have access to the materials you need in order to make it. It is pretty obvious that even though there is quite a lot of stuff in this game, the developer didn't want it to be completely overwhelming to a new player, so you are gradually introduced to new game concepts as you continue on, and you should have all of the basics down by the time you get to the end of the first in-game season, which is spring. There are of course 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter, and they are all 28 days. Each day starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 2 a.m., and if you happen to be awake and running around at 2 a.m., then you will collapse and wake up somewhere else. Much like if your health bottoms out. This might sound like plenty of time to do what you need to do, but you have to keep in mind that in-game time progresses at a rate of about 10 in-game minutes per 7 real-world seconds. This means that you have a matter of minutes to do everything you need to do in a given day, although you generally will be able to get whatever you need done. And you'll also need to contend with the daily cycle that all the villagers have if you're trying to build up friendships with any of them, or you need to go drop off something for a quest or something like that. And those schedules will change depending on the season as well as the weather. And there's also certain days where you have special events that occur, which will basically last the entire day and will put put a monkey wrench into the works of pretty much whatever you were planning to do that day. Now, of course, you do have a calendar you can consult to see when all of the birthdays and special days are, and you are notified in advance of when the special events are going to occur, so you can ultimately plan around those, but for the most part, all of this means that the entire game is about settling into a routine. And here's the problem with that. Some people will certainly find the routine very relaxing and rather enjoyable. Other people will find the routine extremely tedious and grindy and will find it boring. And if you've watched my videos for a while, you know that I tend to find grind in video games to be one of the most awful things a video game can do. It usually makes the game extremely boring and I end up wanting no part of it. So how does that affect my outlook on Stardew Valley? Well, it means that for the vast majority of my playtime in this, I wasn't on my main gaming computer, because if I have access to my main gaming PC or I have access to a gaming console, I'm probably going to play something else. Instead, I ended up almost exclusively playing this on my Surface, which, if you're not familiar with what that is, it is a tablet that you can also use as a laptop. I got it because I needed something to be able to do some computing while I was on the go, and while it is perfectly acceptable for that particular purpose, it's not a very good gaming system, because it's not a very powerful system, and more importantly, it doesn't have much in the way of cooling, so if I try to run something that does require a bit more juice on it, it runs really hot, which, as you might imagine, is not very pleasant for a tablet-like device. But a game like Stardew Valley doesn't tax the system resources. It doesn't make the tablet run hot, so I can play quite a bit of it on that. And since Stardew Valley doesn't really require a whole lot of effort on the player's part, because it's a game where you're meant to relax, and it's a game that doesn't require a huge amount of mental investment to be able to do anything with it, it's basically become something I've used to keep myself busy while I haven't had access to my gaming computer or gaming consoles, and where my handheld systems and my Switch are not practical. And in that role, it has performed quite admirably, although I understand that's not really the typical use case for a game like this. This is really meant to be more of a game where you get into the routine and you just start to zen out. You start to relax and just not really think about it too much. And while I can certainly understand the appeal of that, that's not really something I specifically go to video games for, because my brain doesn't work that way, and I can't really not think about it too much. And as such, I'm generally pretty ambivalent towards Stardew Valley as a whole. Sure, it's got some charm to it, it's really impressive that a single person managed to put all of this together. It's bright and colorful, it's lighthearted, it's easy to pick up and play, it does ease the player in rather well, and there is a variety of stuff to do, although that stuff is generally fairly simple, and this really does end up being a whole is better than the sum of its parts kind of deal. And while I do understand the appeal of it, you have to understand that this kind of game really isn't my thing. And given a situation where I do have access to my main gaming computer or my consoles or a dedicated handheld, and I can invest more time and effort into something, this is never going to be my first choice. But if I don't have access to any of those things, and I don't have the time or energy or the situation where being able to focus entirely on a video game would be beneficial, a game like Stardew Valley actually makes a lot of sense. There's only one major problem with it that prevents it from being ideal in that situation. You can't save anywhere. The only time you can save is by going to sleep at your house. This will end the day, it will give you your summary of the day's income, and then it will save your game and go to the next day. At that point, you can safely quit. But if something comes up where you do need to quit, then you actually end up losing any progress you've made in that particular day, at least since the last save, and when you start the game back up, it will pick up from the start of that day. Thankfully, each in-game day is a fairly short period of time, so you don't end up losing that much progress, but it is still annoying. So in the particular use case that I was able to find for Stardew Valley for me personally, it did perform admirably, but it wasn't ideal. But again, that's not the use case most of you would find yourselves in playing a game like Stardew Valley. You're probably going to play it more to just zen out and relax, and I can understand the appeal of that, even if that's not something I am capable of doing with a game like this myself. And while the game is certainly not perfect, and it has certain areas that it could definitely be improved in, namely the fishing minigame, as well as some of the repetitive dialogue that you'll come across with all the different characters, the game is lighthearted. lighthearted, it's easy to pick up and play, it's easy to put down if you need to, for the most part. It's got quite a bit of charm to it, it'll run on just about anything, and the fact that it was developed almost exclusively by a single person is incredibly impressive. Not to mention, it even has multiplayer in the form of up to 4-player co-op, which is very nice if you're into that kind of thing. And while I admittedly don't have a great frame of reference for this particular genre, Stardew Valley actually did a very good job of teaching me what that genre is all about, and to that end, I give this a 4 out of 5. Again, it's not personally my kind of game, but the quality really shines through here, and if this is your kind of game, or if you were interested in giving the genre a try, I can say that Stardew Valley is actually an excellent starting point. Thank you all very much for watching, and thanks for bearing with me over the past several weeks as I've been having technical problem after technical problem among many other issues, even leading up to the production of this particular video, so again, I do thank you very much for bearing with me during all of this. But again, thank you all for watching, and if you like the kind of videos I make, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. All of the revenue from that goes directly back into the channel, whether that be getting additional games for review, or in recent times, and in occasional other instances, additional equipment, like, say, replacing faulty hard drives, which caused me to lose about 300 gigabytes of gameplay footage of videos that I was working on, which, believe it or not, is actually even more irritating than it sounds, but that's beside the point. The point is that that's the kind of thing the Patreon funds go to, and why I am infinitely appreciative of everybody who contributes. And of course, if you can't afford to contribute to the Patreon or don't want to, that's perfectly fine, I understand. The option is there if you're interested, however. Thanks again for watching and bearing with me during all of this, and I'll see you all in later videos.